you have been hearing, we have Thomas as a GreenCorps member who's been working with the City of Woodbury for the past year on home water audits. Woodbury's WaterWise program has seen, as Thomas puts it, a lot of success in saving water throughout Woodbury, and the home water audit program was created as a response to residents' desire for an outreach program that keeps them more informed about what's going on in the city. And so that's what Thomas is going to tell us about this morning. Thomas is a recent college graduate from the University of River Falls, Wisconsin, and he majored in political science. Thomas is finishing up his service term as a GreenCorps member with the City of Woodbury in the Environmental Division. And with that, Thomas, you can start when you're ready. Welcome. It is really good to have you with us.
We'll share my screen and jump into presentation mode. So thanks for the great introduction. I'm Thomas Hayden. I'm a GreenCorps member. I am serving with the City of Woodbury, and I am right at the end of my service term, finishing it up. So I figured this sort of talk is a great opportunity to talk about what sort of the main project is that I've worked on for the last year. And I thought a good start to the project would be to talk a little bit about the Woodbury WaterWise program, or maybe just the history of water efficiency in Woodbury and what that has looked like over the years. A lot of the programs that the city runs currently are pretty recent developments that have started around 2018 or later. I'd say a lot of our big ones are the WaterWise initiative that started in 2018. And that includes things like our Smart Irrigation Controller program, our HOA irrigation cost share program. We are running a pilot we just finished up a few-year pilot for a low-flow toilet pilot program, and then we got like a renewal on a grant for that. So a lot of the water efficient initiatives that the city has done have been started and kicked off within the last decade. And what I'm working on, the home water audit program, is very much an extension of all of these other programs and this idea around water efficiency throughout Woodbury. So here's just a little more in depth on some of our programs. Sort of three of the big ones for savings. We have the Smart Irrigation Controller program. This is maybe one of our most successful ones that has run for a handful of years now. I think it started back in 2018 and has saved millions of gallons of water. We have our HOA cost share program. Again, I mean, we're looking at millions of gallons saved for water throughout the years. And that just kicked off again this year with more participants, more HOAs participating than previous years. So the number of savings for that is going to go even further up. And then we have our irrigation reuse systems, which of course save a lot of water. So a few years ago, the city had a study done by a third-party HDR that looked at all of the water efficient programming that we were doing and the potential savings for that. And these graphics are sort of from that study. This was done in early 2023 before I started. And another thing that came out of this was a community survey that the city did with residents to look at why residents participate in the programs, why they might not participate in the programs, and what the overall feeling is from residents towards these different programs. And maybe one of the more important findings from this community survey was when we were asking residents about barriers to participating in the program. And you can see on this little table on the right that a significant amount of individuals just did not know about the programs. That was the largest barrier to participation. There was just a lack of knowledge about what Woodbury does, what Woodbury can offer residents, and even what other resources might exist in and around the city for residents to take advantage of. So when I started, there's this idea that the home water audit program could help sort of close this gap, this knowledge gap between what the city does and what residents actually know. And the idea is that maybe it can be dual purpose. So it can be a community outreach program that goes beyond just talking to residents and also tries to maybe target some lower hanging fruit for water savings. We have this little graph of like residential water use, and the single family residential sort of non is 45%. And then you include irrigation onto that, you're adding like another 20%. So a significant portion of Woodbury's water usage obviously comes from residents, and the home water audit program aims to sort of target that 60% of the pie right there, while also communicating to residents what the city can do for them. So when I first started, I had to design the program. There wasn't really much more. There wasn't like a set framework for me to work with when I started, other than these are the two big things we want the program: save water, and we want it to inform residents. So I got to experience program design, which is something that I had no experience with. Um, Definitely no experience working within a city to design a functioning program as well. And a lot goes into it. The first issue that I sort of ran into, or the first challenge, was that this isn't really a common idea for a program. There's not a lot of examples for me to draw from. Maybe the most relevant or closest example would be the home energy squad from XL Energy. And that was a comparison that was thrown around a lot when I first started, was that we were trying to emulate XL Energy. But they don't do a lot with water. So I had to try and find resources on water audits and see how that would work for residential homes. So I spent a lot of the beginning part of my service term reading through different guides and manuals I found, like this one from the South Florida Water Management District. And this is about self-conducting water audits at commercial facilities. This was like a 300 something page document, and about 250 of those pages were not at all useful to me because I'm not going to commercial facilities. But there's a lot of useful information in here about like faucets or shower heads or toilets. And it was able to give me like a baseline of how I would look at those things inside a residential home and what I should look for. So a lot of this early program design was, what do we want to include in the audit? What makes sense to include in the audit? And is it like possible to include these things in the audit? You know, is it possible and useful to go to houses and be able to check the flow rate of their toilet? And it is. Is it possible to check the flow rate of their faucets and shower heads? So these are just sort of the initial questions that had to be answered early on. I think my biggest challenge in designing the program was learning about water softeners. I don't think that I knew water softeners existed when I started at Woodbury. I didn't grow up with one. I've lived in St. Paul my entire life, so I haven't had to have a water softener. So I knew absolutely nothing about it. But this was a pretty big component of the program that my supervisor wanted implemented. So I had to figure out a way to work water softeners into the audit. And when you know nothing about water softeners, it is kind of tricky to figure out like what's useful to know about them and what's possible for you to do on your end when you're performing an audit. I mean, I don't have any experience with plumbing, or I'm not a water softener professional. So there was it was very tricky to find what I could do. And I was able to access a lot of useful resources. I talked to a few people in the field who had experience with water softeners. I talked to an individual from the city of Marshall who had been working with the city on their sort of water softening program. And I had like a few meetings with him. He was able to give me a lot of information on what they do for their program and what they look for, and maybe what might be possible for me to do with mine. And I read through a lot of user manuals for water softeners, a lot of user manuals. And we settled on, after quite a while, we settled on figuring out or looking at like the water hardness setting when we go to houses. So I guess for those of you who don't know the water softeners, just try and bring down the hardness or the grains per gallon of water that flow through them. Tries to bring that down to 0 to fully soften the water. And you can set your water softener to soften for different water hardness levels. Woodbury has a water hardness of 13.5. So water softeners don't need to be set higher than 14. 15, I think, is typically what we recommend residents set them to. And most of the water softeners in Woodbury are set significantly higher than that amount. But yeah, we were able to figure out that it's generally going to be possible to go to a house and look at the water softener and find the hardness setting on it and just record that. The purpose of the audits isn't necessarily to change anything, so we are not turning that down to 15 while we're there, but instead just recording it and sending information back to the homeowner about how they could change it themselves if they want to. So on the right is just a picture from a water hardness or a water softener manual about how you would change the water hardness on that specific model. The tricky thing about this is, of course, every model is different, and so it's different every time to get to the settings. So you end up trying to find the homeowner's user manual more often than not, just to make sure. I had one audit where I accidentally started a regeneration cycle, and I had to quickly cancel that. That would have been awkward to explain to the homeowner. Right. So once we'd sort of figured out everything that was going to go into the audit, we had to think about outreach for the audit and how we were going to reach residents. And an important thing here is that we did 2 pilot phases. So I did an initial pilot phase in the winter that was designed to be a much smaller sample of residents. We were aiming for around 10 residents. So we didn't want to utilize any sort of larger outreach means. That would be like the city in touch email notifications that residents sign up for. That is a great way to get residents to sign up, but we only needed about 10 people, and this in touch would have left us with maybe like 50 or 60 people, and then we're sending rejection emails to like 50 of them. So the initial thing that we did was targeted emails, and I sent out a lot of emails to people who had collaborated with the city before or participated in water efficient programming before. We had a master list spreadsheet of people that have participated in our smart irrigation controller program. So I reached out to those people and I sent out an email saying, hey, you've participated in this program with the city before. We are testing out this new pilot program. If this is something you're interested in, here's what it entails. Feel free to sign up. And that got like no responses. I sent, I think, about 150 emails out to people. I got 2 people to sign up. I got 3 people to sign up, and then one of them wasn't there on the day of the audit. So I got 2 successful audits out of that. It was a very low amount. So we were running behind on the winter pilot phase, and we were trying to figure out a way to get sort of 7 or 8 more people without getting 50 people. And that was where the community events came in. Woodbury started working on their environmental stewardship initiative while I was there, and that involved a lot of community outreach. So there were early on in that process, earlier this year, I think in January, there were community events where residents of Woodbury could go and they could learn about the environmental stewardship initiative and what that entails and give feedback on what they want to see reflected in it. And during one of those events, I just stood up at the front and talked about my program, and I had a sign up sheet, and I was able to get 7 or 8 people to sign up, and we were able to hit our total for the audits for just that small winter pilot phase, which was great. So what all goes into an audit? So the winter one was different than our summer one. We didn't have any sort of outdoor components to the audit, but we still had all the indoor ones. So the sort of basic easy things to check during the audit were the faucets, toilets, and shower heads. And for the faucets and shower heads, that's just checking the flow rate. We ordered a flow bag off of Amazon is where we had to get it. And it was just this plastic bag that you run water into for 5 seconds, and it does the math for you. You run water into it for 5 seconds, and it tells you, it's got little markings on the bag that tell you if it's like a gallon per minute or a gallon and a half per minute. Otherwise, you could just have like a bucket or a large measuring cup and run it yourself and then just do a bit of math to figure out the gallons per minute. But the flow bag was easier and more convenient to use. And that was how we calculated the flow rate for the faucets and shower heads. And it's not like the super most accurate thing, but we're really just trying to get an approximate reading. If we're looking, or if we care about the faucets and shower heads that are inefficient, those are the ones that instead of recording like 2 gallons per minute, they're recording 4 or 5. Those are really the ones that we care about getting. And then for toilets, we checked the flush rate, and we did a dye test for the toilets. So the flush rate was pretty easy because most toilets just say on there. And if they don't, they typically have a model number for the toilet bowl, which you can look up on your own and figure out what that is. And that'll tell you what the flush rate is. And we also did a dye test. And this was testing for leaks in the flapper valve for the toilets. That involved, I got some dye packs from the DNR, and that just involved dropping a dye tab in the toilet tank and waiting about 10 minutes. And if it bleeds through to the bowl, then they have a leak. It's worth noting the efficient metric that we were using for the flush rate for the toilets and the flow rate for the faucets and the shower heads was the EPA water sense metrics. So the EPA has a water sense program that is designed for sort of water efficient appliances or fixtures. So they approve low flow faucets and low flow shower heads and low flush toilets that meet certain efficiency and performance metrics. So for toilets, that efficient metric is 1.28 gallons per flush, as opposed to the standard 1.6 gallons per flush. For faucets, that metric is 1.5 gallons per minute, as opposed to maybe a more standard 2 gallons per minute. And then shower heads are 2 gallons per minute, as opposed to a more standard like 2.5, 3 gallons per minute. And then we looked at water softeners. I talked a little bit about this. We would record the model and brand of water softener and then the hardness setting of the water softener. We were in the winter one and in this longer summer phase, we were able to get pretty much all the water softeners that we saw. We were able to record. There are a few that don't have a readable hardness setting, and then there were a few that we ran into that, or one we ran into that doesn't have a hardness setting at all and just sort of softens down to 0 regardless. And then we did irrigation and soil test, and that was after we did the winter one. There was a break, and me and my supervisor talked about what worked well for the winter audit and what we could add on for the summer one. And everything worked well for the winter audit. We got a lot of useful information around the faucets, toilets, shower heads. We got a lot of useful water softener information. We tacked on at the end, just looking at dishwashers, washers, and dryers, and just checking if they're Energy Star certified, not doing anything too advanced with those in any way. It's just checking for the Energy Star logo. And that went well. We were able to see that I think during the winter audit, about half of houses had mostly Energy Star certified appliances. And that's just a useful sort of recommendation back to the homeowner that we were able to tack on. Like if they didn't have it, at the end of your dishwasher's lifespan, you should look for this. So we kept all of those aspects from the winter audit. And then we think about what could we add onto the summer one. And irrigation is obviously the big one. The majority of homes in Woodbury have irrigation. And during the summer months, that is the biggest sort of water use for all of these homes. So I got to do another sort of bit of research about what an irrigation audit would entail or what that would look like. And there's a lot of different things that you can do. I know that the University of Minnesota sort of extension has a whole thing about irrigation audits for your homes. And they recommend, like setting cups out in an even grid on your yard and then running that zone for about 20 minutes and recording how much water is in the cups and seeing if the displacement of water throughout your yard is even. That's not super possible for a home water audit that we're trying to keep around an hour in length at the maximum. Having each zone run for 20 minutes just leads to like a 3-hour audit, and that is just too time consuming. The winter audits took about 30 minutes each after we sort of got into the swing of things and knew what we were doing going through the houses. So adding on the irrigation and adding on the soil test, we were still hoping for about an hour, 15 minutes at the most for each audit. And then the soil test we tacked on, this was sort of a last minute addition. This was stealing an idea from the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District. They did a soil test collaborating with the U of M Soil Lab, and they paid for soil tests for residents within the watershed and got useful information about soil nutrients. And we thought, this might be interesting. It doesn't relate maybe as much to the sort of baseline water efficiency that we're going for with the rest of the audit, but there's certainly water related impacts here. If someone, if we're talking about like phosphorus loading downstream and stuff. So we tacked on this soil test, and we figured, this is a useful thing. We just go to the audit, dig up a cup or two of soil, send that to the U, get the results back, and then convey that along to the homeowner, which is pretty much how that worked out. Over on the right is the home water audit worksheet that we just fill out during the audit. I print these off. We tried during the winter pilot phase to sort of bring a laptop and fill it out on the laptop. That was just kind of cumbersome to carry it around. So just print them out, and just paper on clipboard is pretty easy. And then type it back up when you get back to the office. An important thing here is the room IDs, is just knowing what room everything is in, because a big component of the audits is, and I'll get into this in a later slide, is sending a report back to the homeowners of the information that we gathered from the house and any recommendations that we have. And it's difficult to have relevant recommendations for like a faucet if we don't know what room that faucet is in, because then the homeowner doesn't know and they have to go through and test all their faucets if they really want to figure it out. So that was kind of a tricky thing as well, as just keeping track of where everything is in the house and making sure that that information translates well to the report and translates well to the homeowner when they read the report. Looking at the worksheet, one other thing we did at the bottom was we just did water hardness tests while we were there. This was useful for a few reasons, actually. So it allowed us to have a conversation with homeowners about what the water hardness is. In Woodbury, since a lot of water softeners are set up to sort of 25 or 30, and they're set a lot higher than they need to, a lot of homeowners are reluctant to lower that down. They're worried about having hard water, but if you're able to do a water hardness test while you're there, and most houses have a bypass, so their cold water on their kitchen sink is unsoftened, you're able to show the homeowner, yeah, the test shows that your water hardness is within this sort of 7 to 15 range, which makes sense because Woodbury's water hardness is 13.5. And so you're sort of well within this range, and your water softener is way outside of this range. So it could definitely sort of go down a bit. The water hardness tests were also useful for water softeners that weren't working. So there were at least 3 houses we went to where we tested the hot water in a bathroom and it was unsoftened or like partially softened. And we were like, okay, well, what's up with that? And typically it was an issue with the water softener that we were able to talk to the homeowner about or recommend. You should probably have someone look at this, or something along those lines. So that is everything that sort of goes into an audit. And then these are the reports that we sent back to the homeowners. Another thing that I had to learn while I was at Woodbury was a little bit of graphic design. Something else I had no experience with whatsoever, but these were reports just created in Canva. So I got to utilize like the brand color feature in Canva, and I put in the Woodbury Waterwise brand, and I got the shade of blue and like the 2 shades of green from it. So you see that present in the reports. And yeah, the whole idea here is just conveying useful information back to the homeowner. So we have on the left the title page for the report, a little thank you note, a picture of their house to make it maybe a bit more personal, address, the inspectors that were there, the date that it happened, and then an efficiency score. I made the little graphic for that in Excel just using a gradient. And the efficiency score isn't something like super scientific. We didn't have a super rigid metric. It was more if they had an issue with their water softener. So I think this house, for example, that's here that it says like priority list replace water softener. I think the water softener was close to 20 years old and it was losing efficiency. So the resin inside had kind of degraded. And we could see that the water in the house wasn't softening all the way down to 0. Then, the recommendation there is you should get a new water softener, one that's more efficient. But they had an issue with the water softener that dropped the score down about 10. And then sort of other ones. So if they had like inefficient faucets or shower head, that would drop it down to 5. And, we're not trying to give the homeowner back a report that says like they scored 20 out of 100. And pretty much everyone is going to score like at least 75 out of 100. But the whole point is to give them an idea of like, well, there's a few things that you could improve on. So we had this priority list, and these are the more important recommendations that we give back to them. These are the things that either save more water or are very cost effective to do. If it's something like putting a low flow aerator on a faucet. And then we had future considerations, things that they could look at down the line that maybe aren't going to give them like as high savings right now, but are certainly things that eventually they'll have to do. And this is maybe how they should do it. So if it's replacing your dryer with an Energy Star certified model, that's a future consideration for when your dryer sort of runs its natural lifespan. And then on the right is just another sample page from the report. This is the toilet page. And this was just, we give them information about their toilets. So this person had all their toilets at the WaterSense efficient, the 1.28 gallons. That's great. We have a paragraph about the dye test combined with a picture of the toilet on the right side of the page that just shows if there's any leaking or not. And then any recommendations if there are any. This person had no leaks. This person had perfectly efficient toilet. So there were no recommendations. And every single page after the title page, we link other resources to them. So for the toilet page, we link them to the EPA WaterSense page about toilets, and we link them to Woodbury's toilet replacement program. If they're able to utilize that, this person would not be able to utilize that because they have water efficient, or they already have WaterSense efficient toilets. But we try and point them in the direction, and this is sort of helping to fulfill that outreach portion of the program, is to point them in the direction of other resources. And this was actually the really good audits were the ones where you were able to have a conversation with the homeowner while you were at the audit, and you were able to talk to them about what those other resources might be that they should look for in the report. There were homeowners who I talked to about like planting trees, and they were struggling with planting trees. And maybe they were trying to plant like conifers or something, and then I can point them to, in the report, we'll have a section on just your general sort of outdoor efficiency stuff. And there will be a link there to like the climate woodlands extension through the university. And that'll give you a list of trees that do better in Minnesota weather. So if the issue is the climate with you planting trees, there's like a solution. Or a lot of residents who were worried about their yard floods a little bit when it rains. They're like downhill from their neighbors, so they have pooling in the backyard. That is, I would point them to the Washington Conservation District, who do free site visit consultations for homeowners to talk about like native landscaping. And I shadowed someone from the Conservation District for a few of those site visits, because I knew that when the summer came around and I was talking to homeowners about their lawn and outdoors, that I would inevitably end up recommending the Conservation District. And so I wanted to be able to talk about it in as much detail as possible. All right, just a little bit of information about the winter pilot. So we did 9 audits, 1 month time frame. A significant portion of, I think the audits took place over like 2 weeks. Most of that 1 month time frame was me designing the reports in Canva and creating that sort of template framework to work off of, and then getting those approved before they got sent back to homeowners. And the outreach was primarily done through community events. The targeting emails were not super successful. Here's a little bit about the summer pilot. After it had expanded, we did 49 audits completed. We aimed for 50, fell a little short. There were a handful of no-shows and a few that I had to cancel. That's okay. we added irrigation and soil testing to the summer pilot. This happened over a 2-month time frame, a little bit less. We started the summer pilot on June 12th was the first audit. And the City In Touch was the primary method of outreach. This is City of Woodbury just has an email notification system. And if someone is signed up for environmental related emails, then through the In Touch system, then they got an email that I had two that I sent out, and that got a lot of people to sign up. Also worth noting, I did not do a lot of these audits alone. I did most of these audits with someone else. For the winter pilot, that was my supervisor was accompanying me, or another one of our environmental technicians was accompanying me on all of those audits. For the summer one, the environmental division had an intern, so the intern was helping me. I did a few on my own, and there's not too much of a difference. It's certainly possible to do on your own. It just stretches out the time frame a little bit. It adds about probably 20-30 minutes to the audit. Just some initial findings. For the faucets, we found that the majority of them were efficient. About 16% were inefficient. And this is looking at, again, that efficiency metric is like the 1.5 gallons per minute for faucets from EPA WaterSense. A faucet that has 1.6 gallons per minute we were not considering inefficient. We were considering things that were sort of significantly over this efficiency metric. So for faucets and for shower heads, anything half a gallon per minute over, we were considering inefficient. So for faucets, 16% of them were running at about 2 gallons per minute. For shower heads, about a quarter of them were running at 2.5 gallons per minute, half a gallon over that 2 gallon metric. And then a surprising amount of toilets were WaterSense standard or WaterSense certified. A majority of toilets were, and then about 40% of toilets were at the federal standard. I found that a lot of houses that had, if they had one toilet that was at the WaterSense standard of like 1.28 gallons per flush, then most of the toilets would be at that standard. Few other findings. I don't have any graphs for these though. About 5% of toilets had a leak in the flapper valve. Interestingly enough, none of the houses that we checked during the winter audit had any leaks. So that was 0% then, but toilets had a leak in the flapper valve for the summer audit, or for the summer pilot phase. The average water softener was set to over 25 for water hardness. So showing up to a house, it was almost certain that there would be potentially savings with lowering that setting on the water softener so that the homeowner uses a little bit less salt. The highest we saw water softener set to was 75. That was like egregiously high. We saw a handful of water softeners that were set below 15. I think the lowest we saw one set to was 3. About 30% of appliances were Energy Star certified throughout the houses. I think typically it was dishwashers that were Energy Star certified. If the homeowner had a washer or dryer that was Energy Star certified, usually both of them were. And looking at the results of the soil tests, soil in Woodbury was pretty high in phosphorus. I think pretty much every soil test that came back to us recorded either very high or high for those findings, which is useful information to convey back to homeowners. And then future plans. So obviously my service term is up in less than a week at this point, and Woodbury will be left with a few things left behind from this program. The important thing is a program manual that I've worked on. And this is just an in-depth guide into how to run the program, how to make the reports. The report template is like shared with a Canva account that the city has, how to fill out the reports, how how to do the audit, what materials you need or what tools you need during the audit, what outreach looks like, maybe how you could go about doing targeted outreach, because it wasn't super successful for us, but there's certainly ways to have it be successful. Just an in-depth manual about how to run the program. And the idea is, the environmental division has intern every year. It's certainly possible that the intern could run the program next year, if it's something that the city wants to do. So that's probably the big thing, or one of the big things. The other big thing is just a spreadsheet of all the collected data. So just this masterless spreadsheet of, here's everyone that participated, here's all the contact information we have for them, here is all the information we grabbed for their house during the audit, here's everything we looked at for like the irrigation, all of that, all into one spreadsheet. And this is useful data that the city can use for future programming. Woodbury is like looking at a water softener optimization program, doing a pilot for that. We've just gotten a grant for our toilet, like low flush toilet program. So having this information about like how many toilets in Woodbury are older than 1994 that have these sort of over 1.6 gallons per flush, the really inefficient toilets, or how many toilets are at 1.6, how many are at the water sun standard. This program gives a little bit of baseline data. It gives a few hundred data points in that regard, for toilets, and then being able to see how many, like where water softeners are at. If we do an optimization program, what would it focus on? So those are sort of the big things that the city will be left with when I'm gone, and how this program translates into the future. It's able to inform future city programming, and it can also just sort of run on its own. If an intern wants to pick it up and they don't have a lot planned for the intern for the summer, that's something pretty easy to give them to do. And that is the end of my slideshow and presentation. I can probably stop sharing my screen in that case. Let's see. There we go. All right. Do I do questions at this point?
Yes, yeah. It is time for questions. Let's look in the chat, and if anybody has one, feel free to put that in the chat, or if you want to unmute, it's not a huge group today, so unmuting is also a great option.
All right. Let's see.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple thank yous and
An in-depth explanation of what grains for hardness are.
yes. Thank you, Michael.
Thousands of leak detection toilet kits to residents. Yeah, I was able to just reach out to the DNR and get, I think I got like 200 or something. And that was really nice. And being able to use those for the toilets.
Yeah, not seeing any questions.
Well, I have one, Thomas. This is Mark again. If just waiting for other people to pose their questions, I'm kind of interested in the possibility of compiling the data that you found, that you're talking about, and actually generating some kind of statistics on it that would inform the city or inform us on how much water people out there are typically using, like the mean and the median, and kind of translate that into what would that mean when you extrapolate that over the city's population, kind of roughly, and what would that mean in terms of how much water could be saved by the city. I think that would really be an interesting set of numbers, you know, and I'm sure other people have thought about that as well, but it would be kind of interesting to see those numbers kind of ginned up in terms of stats.
Yeah, that was a pretty big conversation that me and my supervisor had, was how, I guess, in depth do we want to get with the information that we collect? Do we want to try and have some sort of estimate for how much like water savings these recommendations back to the homeowners could give? And the tricky thing with that is, I guess, or from my point of view, is knowing how much residents use like each specific fixture. I think typically the shower heads that were inefficient were like basement shower heads. So then it's like, how often do they shower in the basement as opposed to in their master bedroom, which is difficult to know. But during the summer pilot phase, our utilities crew at Woodbury heard about this program through one of the In Touch emails that went out. They didn't know about it, and so that garnered a decent amount of interest from our utilities crew, and they were very interested about, are we grabbing like water meter data? Are we doing anything with the water meters to get this sort of more accurate reading? And we were not doing anything with the water meters for these pilots, so we were probably missing out on some useful information, or we're definitely missing out on useful information there. But one of the sort of future considerations I've talked to my supervisor about is having either someone who works like seasonal utilities, or if they have an intern, work with the environmental intern, and then grab that water meter data, and you have that water meter data from like a few months before the audit, or you have the average for the house, and then you can look at it maybe 6 months later after the audit and see if they've done any of the recommendations, if it's made an impact on their water usage, and get some sort of harder data there. There's a few questions now. As part of the irrigation-related portion of the audit, were there attempts to reach out to Bowser or the DNR to apply for grants like Lawns to Lagoons, or them to the Washington Conservation District? I had a few handouts or like brochures from the Conservation District that I would give to homeowners, and I would point them in the direction of that. And that is those site visits that the Conservation District does. They do point homeowners to like the Lawns to Lagoons program. They do focus very heavily on native landscaping, focusing on things like fescues and rain gardens. So yeah, that was a part of the soil test and like the irrigation part of the audit. When we were sort of outside talking to the homeowners, we were trying to sort of see how receptive they are to native landscaping, and if that's something they're thinking about. And a lot of homeowners were definitely thinking about that. There were a few that had already got like fescue lawns, or they already had rain gardens. Although a significant portion of the audits were done with homeowners that were in stricter HOAs or in townhomes, and they had very little control over their yard, or virtually no control over their yard. So those houses, it's very difficult to try and promote native landscaping when they can't do really any landscaping. Yeah. What are water rates in Woodbury? Oh, I am not. I know it's like the cost of water. It's a tiered system, but I don't remember what the rates are for each tier off the top of my head. Did anyone care about financial savings to take action? Is that more like spending more money on the like larger savings? There were a handful of homeowners who definitely seem to spend a lot of money on making their house more efficient. there were people that were like, I think there was at least like 2 households that were very much, oh yeah, we could just like get a new washer or dryer if these ones are not very efficient. So yeah. What do you think about putting together a guide to help other cities and localities do something similar based on your experience? Yeah, I think that is also one of the points of the manual is, and my supervisor has been, pretty strict about how the manual is written because of it. Is if, let's say, nearby city to Woodbury, like Cottage Grove, reaches out and say, "Oh yeah, we heard that you were working on this program. This is maybe something we'd like to emulate." Then the manual can be sent to them, and they already have this beginning framework, so they don't have to go through that sort of few months of like research and piecing together bits of other programs like I had to do. So the training manual is very much that guide. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions from anyone? Otherwise,
I have
can
one more.
okay, thanks, Mark.
So I was really interested in what you found with the water softener settings. Not surprised so much, but I'm kind of wondering who's making those settings on there, right? Is it the homeowner that's typically making the settings and just not really having a clue about where it should be set? Or is it people who are, installing water softener systems there that are just not making the settings properly? I'm kind of interested that so many of them were just incorrectly set, and I'm kind of wondering why and where one might direct the efforts to make sure that they're set right in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just set by whoever installs it. And I watched a handful of videos on water softener installations, and I think the general rule of thumb is to, for people who are installing water softeners, is to bump it up a bit for potential iron in the water. So if there's like, for each 1 part per million iron in the water, you want to raise that hardness setting by 5. I think is the sort of general rule of thumb. So it's typically raised like 10 to 15 on install, just to account for that potential iron in the water. And Woodbury doesn't have any iron in the water, so that doesn't really need to be accounted for, which I think explains that sort of 10 to 15 over consistently. But on our utilities page, the city's utilities page, they do state that the water hardness is 13.5. And I'd say about maybe 15 to 20% of the homes that we went to, probably closer to 20% of the homes that we went to, were set around 13 to like 15. And that was each time the homeowner said, yeah, we looked up on the city website what the water hardness was and changed it ourselves. So there's certainly a handful of residents of the population that is changing it on their own. But it seems like on install, it's typically just not set as efficiently as it could be.
All right. Thank you so much for the talk today. It was very informative, very interesting. We have 1 minute, so if somebody does want to squeeze in a question, you can. But otherwise, thanks so much. We appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.